back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast of the Swamp 24/7 podcast. I am Jordan Hill, the host of the Junkyard Dawgcast. Got Graham Hall from Swamp 24/7 on with me on this Thursday morning, getting ready to preview the world's largest outdoor cocktail party. Number 5, Georgia, Florida, 3:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Saturday, down in Jacksonville. This will be the last game in Jacksonville for a couple of years, but want to thank Graham for popping on. We're going to talk Georgia, we're going to talk Florida, just see where these two teams are getting ready for Saturday, and then a little bit later on in the episode, we'll talk about the matchup. We'll talk about what we expect to see down in Everbank Stadium. So first off, Graham, appreciate you taking the time. How are things down Florida's way, getting ready for this another edition of this rivalry game?
I know y'all are used to it up there, man, but it's too cold here for us. I'll be quite honest. I woke up 47 degrees, was freezing my tail off, man. I miss the sunny weather. I miss the humidity right now. It feels crazy to say that, but otherwise, no complaints whatsoever. It's an exciting time. I always tell people that November is my favorite month of the year, not because of Thanksgiving, although I do love me some Thanksgiving mac and cheese. Basketball and football, it's the most exciting time to cover and follow college sports, and very pumped for this Florida-Georgia matchup to kick off, or I guess I should tell y'all, Georgia-Florida, whatever you want to call it. I got no preference. Excited for it to kick off this exciting month.
Yeah, the Georgia folks will tell you that Florida-Georgia is a band and Georgia-Florida is a football game. I don't really get caught up in that, but no, November is a great time with the overlap with football and basketball. And we'll talk about basketball a little bit later on in the show. But, Graham, I figured we would take this podcast to kind of take turns talking about both teams. And I'll start with the big changes at Florida. They're 3-4. They move on from Billy Napier. Billy Gonzalez, the receivers coach, is now running the show. I know that there's a small sample size at this point, and they haven't played a game. But what have been your impressions of what Billy Gonzalez has done to this point, getting ready for his first game as interim coach, and any obvious changes to this point with him running the show?
Well, I think the biggest thing is you got to keep the team together, and that got a little bit easier to do with the transfer portal rules. I know that there were people calling for Billy Napier to be fired as early as week 2 this season when they lost to USF, just given how tough the schedule was, how they would have to play really 10 straight games against tough opponents. And that proved to not be the right decision because the NCAA, the ever unpredictable NCAA, made the transfer portal rule change where the portal doesn't open immediately after a coach is fired. The rules now give the new coach that comes in a chance to keep the roster together, and the portal won't open until 5 days after the new coach is officially announced and hired, which is really beneficial for a team's competitive chances during the season. So that is huge, where guys aren't immediately looking at the portal. And Billy Gonzalez is a guy who was the obvious choice to me. I know people floated some names like Jabbar Jalouk, Ron Roberts, Russ Callaway. Billy Gonzalez just makes the most sense to me. This is a guy who won a pair of national championships at Florida when he was the wide receivers coach with Urban Meyer. In this day and age, and especially just in coaching in general, to have an assistant coach make 3 stops at a university just speaks to how highly regarded he is as a developer, the relationships he has, the respect he has within the coaching fraternity, so to speak. This is someone who bleeds orange and blue, and that is infectious. It's contagious to the players on the roster. It's something that appeals to the fan base. It's someone that they can continue rallying around, players and fans alike, even in a head coaching change where you can start to see apathy. People think that, the season is lost. There's nothing left to play for. But Billy Gonzalez has such a feel-good story, and this is such a elusive opportunity for him. He hasn't been a head coach in his tenure. Started coaching back in, I think, 1994 with Urban Meyer, played for Urban Meyer, and then comes to Gainesville and has made stops in Gainesville with Dan Mullen and then with Billy Napier as well. He's someone that Florida fans just should root for, and he's got a very engaging, energetic personality. But I think that from the changes that you could see, let me just be maybe a little bit of a Debbie Downer here, so to speak. There's a lot of people out here, within the Florida fan base who are sitting there being like, okay, now the offense is going to be more explosive. You're going to see 5 wide receiver sets. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. We were in week 8 of the regular season expecting wholesale changes to throw out the offensive playbook and start fresh, whatever you want to call it. unrealistic expectation. I got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you if you think that's going to happen. Now, they have an arsenal of plays that they haven't used. Every team does. And maybe you see some more of that. Maybe you do see some more 4 wide receiver sets, but Florida has established itself with 12 personnel. They've worked on it for, the previous 9-10 months, and expecting that all to go away may just be wishful thinking for a lot of people. But what you could see offensively in terms of improvements is operating a little bit quicker. And that is such a generalization, which is why I hesitate to even say it. But Florida has been a little bit slow at times to get the play call in, whether that's due to an operational things on the sidelines, whether it's due to the lack of experience that DJ Lagway has, whatever it may be, they can operate a little bit quicker. So maybe that is something you could see. And for Lagway, he also has gotten a little bit healthier. So maybe you see the playbook expand just due to that, because they haven't been able to use him as a willing runner at the rate that they wanted to, given his lower body injuries that he's dealt with, the calf strain in fall camp. And that makes that aspect of it, I think, a little bit tougher for Georgia to prepare for. But I think the biggest one, and I want to get your thoughts on this, is the unknown that comes with Billy Gonzalez. His desire maybe to spread it out a little bit more, use those 4 wide receiver sets, and then you put some things on film for Lagway to do that you haven't seen so much this year. I mean, do you agree with me in that sense that just having an interim coach maybe can make things a little bit more difficult to prepare for, even if there was this notion that Florida's offense was pretty easy compared to a lot of the other offenses out there to prepare for, just given what you came to expect from them? But now you go to an interim head coach. Is that going to make things a little bit tougher for Georgia's defense to prepare for it? I think it's an interesting question. I would love to hear your thoughts on that.
No, I think for sure, especially when you factor in that they had the bye week. I feel like if they make this change on a Sunday and then they've got this game 6 days later, it's sort of like, well, what can they, what could they realistically change while you're also prepping for an opponent? But to do it during the bye week, I mean, I think that what is really interesting, Graham, I don't know how much you've had a chance to watch Georgia this year. They have, the defense specifically has struggled early in games. They cannot get stops early in games, and that's when you're dealing with the opponent's game script. That they're going in with a plan for that opening drive, maybe the first couple of possessions, and Georgia just seems like they don't know exactly what they're expecting. So that to me sets up really well for Florida from the standpoint of, I mean, you truly don't know what to expect. You got a different play caller now. You've got, the guy who had been the head coach and the play caller to start the season isn't there anymore. So to me, that's really interesting. And then even just the standpoint of having an interim coach, and Kirby talked about this during the bye week. You didn't name the specific situations, but you look at Virginia Tech, you look at UAB, you look at UCLA. I think these teams have gotten a shot in the arm by making a change during the season. So, with Billy Gonzalez especially, the fact he's been at Florida for as long as he's been, I think this is his 3rd different stint. To me, that's as much interesting as far as getting the guys motivated as it is that, I think there will be stuff on those opening drives that Georgia just is not prepared for because it's someone totally different calling the plays.
It's pretty similar to the Jim McElwain era in the aspect of Florida has been really, really impressive on opening drives. I mean, you have seen them be methodical, do some things on that opening drive that, puts their top skill position guys in a position to, speed and space, make something happen. And they've operated quicker on the scripted drive, which makes a ton of sense. But Florida fans, in similar fashion to the Jim McElwain era, would then see that and be like, all right, well, let's see how the rest of the game unfolds. They wouldn't get too confident when Florida would go down and strike quickly because they want to see how they manage the game the rest of the way. I do think that Florida is going to continue to get the script in and be efficient with that because everyone outside of Billy Napier is still here. Russ Callaway, Rob Sale, Jabbar Jalouk, Billy Gonzalez, Ryan O'Hara, they were all involved in the construction of the script when Billy Napier was here. So you're not losing that, so to speak. And it's everything after that first drive that I think people are optimistic that it's going to be a little bit more of a consistent, impressive offense the rest of the way. That's what people are hoping for. If you see a decline in the script, even if it's due to Georgia's success defensively, I think people will start to lose a little bit of that confidence that they have right now that the offense can be so much better. Because this is a situation where you do have someone who's relatively new to a role like this, and not just Gonzalez, but Ryan O'Hara as well. Russ Callaway is still a young guy. But unlike what Georgia's dealing with, Florida has a lot of film, of Georgia that they've seen. And so I think that they're going to have, and they have the extended time in the bye week, which, to your point about making a change, you can't make a change in my mind and then expect a couple of days later to have the team ready to play. They need time to decompress. This is something that, guys are still dealing with behind the scenes. This isn't something that just goes away when they're used to seeing a guy every single day. Someone who recruited them often 4 years ago is no longer in the building. That's not just an overnight transition necessarily. So the bye week makes a ton of sense, not just from a implementation of, new systems type thing, but also like a decompressing human element type thing. That's why the bye week, even when we'd written, I wrote before the Mississippi State contest that win or lose against Mississippi State would be the ideal time to do it. And it wasn't because of what would happen in that game. It's because of you're going to make a change. The bye week was kind of your final time to do it, to remain competitive, to give the interim head coach a chance. And this is an audition for Billy Gonzalez. Say he wants to be a head coach elsewhere. The openings at places like Colorado State and, UAB and stuff like that. If he wants to even have a chance to be considered for one of those jobs, which we don't really know if he does, this is an opportunity for him to have the best results possible, and it makes it the most fair to him. So from that aspect, it's really intriguing here. But, I want to get more of your thoughts on Georgia's defense, because when I think of Georgia, I think of sound play on the offensive line, and I think hard-nosed physical defense. What have been those issues that from the start of the games, what have been the issues, whether it's tackling, missed assignments, whatnot, just being off, caught off guard, and how have they improved in those facets as the game has gone on?
Yeah, it's been sort of maddening to kind of figure out like what the issue is. I mean, it seems like it's been different games. Tennessee was just giving up explosive plays. I mean, Chris Brazzell the third, I mean, had I think 3 touchdowns, and I think all three of them were explosive touchdowns. Alabama just really struggled to get off the field on third down, and I think a lot of that, and this is something that Kirby's talked about a lot. Georgia's just had issues on early downs, which make third down a lot more manageable, and that's just been a problem throughout this year. Kirby's talked about tackling; he wants to see better tackling, but it's kind of wild looking at Pro Football Focus, and I can't put everything on these stats, but I think Georgia's got 40 missed tackles, and that's a little less than half as many as the next team in the SEC. So they really haven't struggled that much when it comes to tackling. I think the biggest issues have just been giving teams manageable third downs. That's been a big problem. And then the recurring thing that I can say has been an issue every single game. They just really struggle to create pressure on the quarterback. They've never really been a defense that records a lot of sacks, but they talk about havoc, they talk about pressure. This is a group that struggles even in that aspect. I think losing Chaz Chambliss to the NFL has hurt more than they expected. Damon Wilson having a fantastic year from Missouri, and they just have not had edge play in Quintavious Johnson. Ella Mendoza, the Army transfer, has not really panned out to date like people expected. And the defensive line, they just have really struggled to get to opposing quarterbacks. And I think if you wanted a prime example of that, I mean, Ty Simpson, he just dissected the Georgia defense. They just could not get to him. So there's been different issues throughout the year. Again, Kirby harped on tackling. There's been some issues there, but I think when you look at one group specifically, the defensive line just does not have the guys that can rush the passer. Now, they've done a fantastic job stopping the run, and that was something that was talked about quite a bit. And I think, truth be told, Kirby would rather they be good at stuffing the run compared to rushing the passer. But they've allowed quarterbacks to sit back and pick them apart at times. And Trinidad Chambliss did that for 5 drives in that Ole Miss game, and then they finally made some plays in the fourth quarter. But when you play these really good quarterbacks, Graham, that can be a recipe for disaster.
Which is really interesting because Florida's issue has not necessarily been protecting DJ Lagway or establishing the run. Jaden Baugh is coming off of his most impressive performance. He's had a couple career games this season alone. He had 109 yards a couple games ago, and now he's coming off a 23 carry, 150-yard performance against Mississippi State. I mean, he consistently picks up 6-7 yards on attempts and has been one of the primary reasons when they've been able to move the ball downfield. It's because he keeps running. And I think if you can't contain him, that's going to make it, difficult for Georgia's defense to get off the field. But for Florida, in a lot of the games that they have struggled, it's when it hasn't been a manageable third down, when first and second down haven't gone according to plan, or a penalty backs them up 5 yards, and then they're in a 3rd and 6, a 3rd and 7, and they have struggled to execute in those situations. So even if Georgia can't get to the quarterback, if they can force Florida into some, 3rd and 7 situations, the Gators haven't really proven that they are great at moving the chains. You go back to that Texas A&M game where, again, Texas A&M's defense is just on another level. They disrupted Florida's offensive line at a rate that we haven't seen this season. Austin Barber had a tough game. They used Hayden Hansen a little bit less to chip and help him out against Cassius Howell than we thought he would. And that really led to Florida struggling a lot. But third down defense from Texas A&M has been so impressive this year. I mean, they had a game against Auburn where I think they allowed Auburn to go 1 for 13 or 0 for 13. And then Mississippi State a week later went 1 for 11. And then Florida went, I think, 1 for 11 or 1 for 10 against Texas A&M. But part of that was because Florida was consistently in 3rd and long. I think only one of those was shorter than 3rd and 4. I mean, 6 of those were of more than 7 yards, and that's just not feasible for extending drives. And Florida has struggled in that regard. So if they can manage to give DJ Lagway time in the pocket and be able to establish the run against a really, really good, in my opinion, talented Georgia defense, then I do think it's going to be a little bit more of a back and forth contest than some people would think it's going to be. Gunnar Stockton is fascinating to me because I don't know what is in the water at Athens, man, but they just seem to churn out capable quarterbacks. Like they're never going to necessarily blow you away from a dual threat standpoint or be someone like a DJ Lagway or Marcel Reed, but they're just efficient every single year. And I had my questions about Gunnar Stockton in that Notre Dame game last year, but it seems like he has exceeded expectations. And maybe that's just my outside view of it. But you look at the numbers, I think just one interception so far this season. I mean, you got to win the turnover battle to be in these games, especially if you're not, the most talented team on the field. And Gunnar Stockton doesn't give defenses many opportunities to do just that. What do you make of, his season? Because so much has been made of DJ Lagway's, I think, disappointing season. And maybe this is a little bit of a philosophical thing, but that seems like a human thing at times where we're more prone to highlighting the negative, whether it's, you go to a restaurant, if you have a good meal, are you going on Yelp necessarily and giving them a 5-star review? Not as often as you would if you have a really bad experience. You're hopping online and trashing the establishment. We don't seem to come out enough and say, hey, this quarterback is exceeding expectations, or acknowledging that maybe you had some subpar expectations and they're doing better than that in their first full year as a starter. But that seems to be my consensus opinion. And from what I've heard from people of Gunnar Stockton, you get an up close look at him. Just what has he done well this season that has allowed him to have a more impressive year than all these national pundits and analysts thought he would?
Yeah, and I think you hit the nail on the head, Graham, that I think even folks on the beat had a hard time kind of setting the bar for what they expected of Gunnar Stockton. And I think even into this season, there were times where you kind of wondered, okay, can Gunnar Stockton get this done? I think that the Auburn second half, I think the Ole Miss game as a whole, and the Tennessee game back in week 3 for sure, showed you that he is fully capable. I mean, he's a guy that just I call him a throwback. I mean, to me, he's just kind of an old school kind of player. Doesn't mind taking hits, though he started doing a better job of getting down. When we talked to, I think it was Monroe Freeling, the left tackle, he brought up a run that Gunnar had against Kentucky where he ran for about 20 yards and then decided to get down. And Monroe said, yeah, I'd gotten banged up. I was watching it in the locker room, and I said, that's the smartest decision he's ever made. So I think the biggest thing, you are seeing him get more comfortable. I think in the last 2 or 3 games, trusting his offensive line. I think early in the season he had happy feet. I think he was quick to bail out of the pocket just because he didn't really trust that group in front of him. But I think he's done a better job of trusting them, of picking when to leave the pocket. He's done a good job when he has scrambled. It's made sense and been in some prime situations. Done a better job working through his progressions. I think he's gotten more comfortable, Graham, when it comes to taking deep shots. And it was talked about on one of the ESPN broadcasts. I can't remember which game it was, but basically trying to instill in Gunner, look, if you've got a one-on-one, your guy doesn't need to be running 5 yards open. You put the ball where the guy can get it and have the confidence in him to make that play. And I think you've seen him get more comfortable with that. And the thing I would say with the turnovers, I should have said this too with the defense, that this Georgia defense has missed out on opportunities to create turnovers. And I think you hit the nail on the head that a game like this, especially if you look at it from the Florida perspective, Florida's got to create turnovers, I would say, to have a chance to win this game. And Gunner's just done a really good job of taking care of the football, managing it. I would say this. I'd say his biggest area where you could take advantage as far as turnovers. He's taken some big hits this year. He fumbled against Tennessee on a play that had the potential of knocking Georgia out of the game. Now the defense winds up forcing a field goal, and I think at that point that made it an 8-point game that they wind up coming back and tying in the fourth quarter. But I think that Gunner has lived up to expectations, and when you talk to him, you understand. I truly don't think, Graham, he pays attention to any of the talk, whether he's playing well or whether he's not. I think he's just a guy that he's a gamer. His teammates have talked about the fact that, he's different once he puts a helmet on. I mean, like, he is hell on wheels, take a hit, bounce back up, dust himself off, get ready for the next play. And I don't know that Georgia could ask anything more of Gunner. I think he's done a great job. Going to have to continue to be willing to take those deep shots to make those plays. And I'd say, too, watch him as a runner. He is a very capable runner, and he's not going to scramble for 200 yards on Saturday, but in big situations, he's able to run. Graham, I wanted to talk about DJ Lagway. There were a lot of expectations, as you hit on. Struggled with turnovers to this point, but maybe this second half he is able to kind of right the ship and end the year on a high note. How would you evaluate his play to this point? What needs to be cleaned up going into these next few games, starting with Georgia?
Yeah, I think that people put, the cart in front of the horse a little bit last year when he was so impressive. And a lot of that is what we said about, Billy Gonzalez. I mean, he's an unknown. DJ Lagway was pretty unknown skill set wise last year. And that changed as the season went on. And then he wasn't able to do a ton of what they recruited him to do, which was use his legs, get outside the pocket, make explosive plays. I mean, I think you saw him still hit guys in stride, and I think he had more than 10, throws last season over 40 yards, which was really impressive, just what he was able to do. But if you watch the games last year, there was still a lot for him to improve upon. Reading defenses, his footwork leaves a lot to be desired. And he was dealing with a shoulder injury back in fall camp last year that never fully healed. Still, I don't know what the situation is, but it led to a decision to alter his throwing mechanics in the offseason. So you've seen someone who is cognizant of how he is throwing the football, which can lead to some dip in confidence, to some errant throws, to being a little bit less accurate as he continues to grow more comfortable with that refined motion. And then just the injuries that he dealt with from the shoulder. He had a right hip sports hernia in spring camp as well. Then he missed most of fall camp with a calf strain. He's got an injured hamstring. He got his toe stepped on before Miami. I mean, I feel like I'm documenting a guy who just, tumbled down a mountain, and we're trying to recount every single injury that he has. It has led to inconsistent practice time, limited usage from a good on good standpoint, 11v11, taking consistent reps throughout the week. and having a chance to work on the areas that he needs to improve, from reading defenses, the throwing motion I mentioned, but also, his footwork is not great. And maybe it may feel unfair to criticize a second-year quarterback for not having elite footwork, right? I mean, it's kind of a situation where when you see someone with fantastic mechanics, technique, footwork, when they're a second-year guy, then you can sit here and start praising them. But when they still are working on those things as an underclassman, it's not really out of the ordinary. But DJ Lagway is under such a microscope that after his first year, where he didn't even play a full season, people were already talking about, oh, Heisman Trophy this, Maxwell Award winner this, can he throw for over 3,000 yards and have a top 10 passing season in Florida history? We got way too ahead of ourselves. I'm not just talking about people in the media on the beat, but fans as well. And it was Florida's coaching staff trying to kind of pump the brakes on that a little bit and praise him for his potential, while noting, without admonishing him or criticizing him unfairly, that he still had a lot to work on. So you're seeing a quarterback that everyone is paying attention to. He's closer and closer to a household name. The Gatorade commercials, Chipotle, Beats by Dre. He has the profile at a national level where people are now noticing all the things that were in plain view last season, but maybe just got ignored or undersold because he was still making plays. So it's not really too surprising necessarily. But heading into this game, from what we've heard, which makes this really intriguing, is that he's the healthiest he's been all season. That the bye week has helped. The toe is fine now. He's out of the walking boot that he was in after the loss to Miami. His hamstring has gotten better. You may notice a little slight limp for him, but the guy he's still going to be a willing runner. He's still going to escape outside the pocket. He's a big quarterback. I mean, we're talking nearly 250 pounds. There aren't many quarterbacks. I don't think there is a quarterback at the professional level that weighs as much as he does. And he's tough to tackle and bring down in the open field. And they're going to use that more, I believe, this weekend than they have been able to in recent weeks. And that makes it very intriguing, because his ability to be a quarterback with escapability, throw on the run, roll out, be used not just, in the RPO setting, but play action, you're going to see him, I think, take advantage of some of the, unannounced plays, like coaches like to say, that he hasn't really been able to do a ton this season. So despite the flaws, despite the areas in need of improvement, he still has a ton of potential and a great skill set, which is going to make it tough for Georgia's defense. And he's got a lot of talent around him from a skill position standpoint. But the interesting thing is that Florida will be without its leading receiver in this game, Vernell Brown III, the legacy guy who has nearly 500 receiving yards, still without a touchdown. And more than that, he also serves as Florida's primary punt and kickoff returner. So you're talking two phases of the game are impacted by an injury right there. And then Aiden Mizell is out for Florida as well. So they're going to need to take advantage of some of the talent that they have at the skill possessions, even if they're not full strength, whether it's Dallas Wilson, J. Michael Sturdivant, or, Eugene Wilson III, a guy who's fully healthy, but hasn't maybe had the production that a lot of people expected him to have in his third season in Gainesville. I'm not alone here in having not watched a ton of Georgia film. So as much as it is Gunnar Stockton, what talent does he have around him? And, I mentioned some injuries. I do hate talking injuries sometimes, but they are such an important part of the game. And Florida fans have looked at that availability list every single week and seen double-digit names on there. I looked at Georgia's this week, saw 4 names, and I'm sitting here and saying, man, that must be nice. That must be nice a little bit. You guys don't have to talk too much about injuries and press the coach for questions. And then they'll, I've watched and listened to you guys on the SC teleconference. Kirby Smart seems to be pretty forthcoming a lot of the time, even if it's a, 6-word answer from him. Yeah, he'll be back. Even if so, Florida has always said that you'll get the availability report on Wednesday night, where they're trying to use every bit of minimizing the info coming out, because when you're a team that's playing this many top opponents and you need every competitive advantage you can get, keeping that information out of the public, out of the public eye is to your advantage a good bit here. But I digress. What are the names that Florida fans need to know around Gunnar Stockton that Florida's defense is going to have to account for?
I will say on the injury front, it just kind of depends on when you ask Kirby. So there's been once or twice he does the we'll know Wednesday night, with the availability. But yeah, it's a running joke over on the Junkyard that if he's talking about someone, he'll say he's got a leg, or we're hopeful. It's like, hey, thanks, man. But every
I
once in a
hope
while,
he's got a leg. I hope he's
yeah,
got one. Hope
it'd
he has
be
two.
bigger. It'd be bigger news if he didn't, Graham.
Yeah, breaking story right there, man.
So talking about the players around Gunnar Stockton, I'll start and say one of the four names that are on that list, and this was not a surprise. Frankly, none of the names on that injury report were a surprise for Georgia this week, but Colby Young got hurt in the Ole Miss game, very early in that Ole Miss game, fractured bone in his leg. They haven't given a timetable. It seems like it would take a playoff run for Georgia for him to come back, and that's a huge loss. He was Georgia's second leading receiver behind Zachariah Branch, and he's a guy, Miami transfer from a couple years ago. He had become the go-to guy. He was the guy, if they were in 4th and 5, we got to have this or we lose the game, I would be paying attention to Colby Young. I would think he would be the target on the play, fought for extra yards, just a reliable big X receiver for Georgia. So that loss is significant, but the fact that it happened before a bye week, I think, is helpful for Georgia. I think you look at Noah Thomas, a Texas A&M transfer, a similar big-bodied guy. I think that he'll play a good bit in Young's absence, and I'd keep an eye on C.J. Wiley. I think that maybe the true freshman might get in the mix as well. But as far as the other proven guys around Gunner, I'll actually start at running back and say Chauncey Bowens, Nate Frazier. Nate Frazier, who, if I don't know if you remember this, Graham, last year did the Gator chomp after a touchdown and got a penalty, and then Kirby Smart, in not so many words, said don't ever do that again when he got to the sideline. So the run game versus Florida's run defense, I think, is going to go a long way in determining how this game goes. Georgia's one of the nation's leaders when it comes to rushing yards per game. Florida, I think they're 31st in the nation in terms of rushing yards allowed. The only other defense that ranks higher than Florida that Georgia's faced so far was Auburn, and that was a struggle. I think Georgia was just short of 80 yards on the ground, and that's been such a big piece of how Georgia has played the game this year. I think some of their biggest drives have been, hey, let's take 12, 13 plays and let's just grind on this defense. Tennessee game, what got them back in the game very early in the third quarter, they put together a long drive and pretty much ran the ball the entire way down the field. So I would pay attention to Georgia's run game. Other receivers, by far the biggest transfer Georgia added this offseason, Zachariah Branch, has been fantastic. He does stuff, Graham, during games, I swear it looks like something out of Madden. Like a jump cut he had against Ole Miss. He's a guy that's just dangerous, and I think there's been a lot of logic in how a lot of the time Georgia's just thrown it to him out in the flat, giving him the ball as quickly as possible and just let him go make a play. There's been a few more instances. I know there was at least one in the Ole Miss game where they threw him the ball downfield. Very dangerous receiver, a guy that I think is going to get the ball quite a bit. Other guys you keep an eye out for, London Humphreys, kind of been in and out as far as how productive he's been, but he had some big catches against Ole Miss. I'd watch the tight ends. With Colby Young out, it seemed like they targeted the tight ends. Lawson Lucky, Oscar Delp, quite a bit more in that Ole Miss game. I think that's to the benefit of this offense. It just felt like for the majority of the first half of Georgia's season that they really struggled to get them the ball, that they really struggled to do anything with those guys besides have them help in pass protection and run blocking, which they did a fantastic job. But losing Colby Young, not a small hit for Georgia, but I think they got the guys around them to make up for it, to make the plays they got to have. And since I mentioned, Florida's success stopping the run, I want to talk about their defense as a whole, Graham. It seems like to me, as an outsider, someone who's checked in on some Florida games this year, that the defense has been the strength of this team. What are your impressions of where this defense is at this point in the year? Who are 3 or 4 guys that Georgia fans should keep an eye on?
Yeah, this defense has been better than people thought, to be quite honest. There have been some issues, or some areas, I guess I should say, that they look to be a little bit better in. Against Mississippi State, they were missing 3 of their top 4 defensive backs. Bryce Thornton was the lone starter that was available out there. Jordan Castell was unable to go due to an injury. Cormani McLean, was close to playing and just couldn't play in the game. And you saw Ben Hanks, Alfonso Allen, Lagonza Hayward used at a high rate, and they gave up more explosive plays than we have seen out of them. But getting Castell and McLean back, and with Devin Moore back there with Thornton, this has been a defense that's been really sound in the third level, has minimized the explosive plays they've given up. Their linebacker unit, I think, is one of the best that we've seen in honestly close to a decade from a depth standpoint. Miles Graham, who's a legacy guy, his dad, Ernest Graham, played at Florida from 98 to 2002 with Steve Spurrier and then Ron Zook. Miles has been fantastic as a sophomore linebacker. I mean, he is aggressive, picks up on plays quickly. He's a sound tackler, good communicator, seems far more mature than a 19-year-old, to be quite honest. And he's surrounded by 2 guys in Aaron Childs and Jaden Robinson, who just have done a really good job. Robinson's been really good at punching the football out at times. I think he's forced 2 fumbles this season. Aaron Childs has been, one of Florida's top players, and he's kind of an interesting guy. He's used as a stack backer a little bit here, where you can line him up on the edge and have him drop into coverage there as that weak side guy. He's been a really impressive, a guy who's only been on campus for 15 months. To have those 2 underclassmen leading in your front 7 has been really, really big for Florida, which has been made more impressive by the fact that Florida's top linebacker, or one of their 2 top linebackers, Shamar James, is doing a really good job with the Dallas Cowboys in the NFL after he left after his junior season. Grayson Howard has been dealing with what I've been told is the after effects of a hamstring recovery, where he missed much of spring camp, missed a lot of fall camp, and then has just not been able to play at the level that he was at last year. Now, whether he needs another procedure or this is just a situation where he's just going to need more rest and time away from the field, I don't know. But there have been a handful of games recently that was a guy who didn't miss a tackle all last season in the 9 games he played. And now he's playing, a handful of snaps, single-digit snaps, or he's not playing at all. He didn't play against Mississippi State, so that's leaving them without one of their top linebackers that you would expect to see out there at a high rate. But the defensive line and the edge group is probably the one that has been a little bit more of a mixed bag. Coming into the year, the interior of the defensive line, I had my questions about. Caleb Banks was still dealing with some lower body injury type stuff, and without him there, they were going to rely on a transfer in Brendan Bett and Jamari Lyons, who was coming off a compound fracture that he suffered in August of last year. And then a second-year guy in Mekhi Barrow, who had a lot of promise, but you didn't really know what to expect out of him. The interior of the defensive line, even with Banks out potentially, or I should say probably for the rest of the season, has been impressive in my mind. I think that Jamari Lyons and Barrow have looked good. Brendan Bett has been an impact player for Florida, and they've been able to do something that's pretty rare in this day and age, which is play freshmen along the interior of the defensive line. Joseph Mbachu and Jeremiah McLeod have been impressive for Florida when given opportunities, and they haven't played a ton, but there have been some games there where they've played 30 snaps, and to do that as a first-year player is, you got to expedite not just the technique and the training process, but guys are going to have to change their bodies often, shed some bad weight and add some muscle, and they've done a good job in that in the 9 months they've been on campus. So that unit has impressed in my mind. The edge group is the one that you were expecting to have a little bit more production this season because they returned Tyreek Sapp, who led Florida in sacks and tackles for loss. They added a really impactful freshman in Jaden Woods, who has been good. George Gums Jr. came back to play that jack linebacker spot. And Cameron James is someone that Florida is extremely high on, a 30-year guy. But they haven't been able to – they've done a good job setting the edge, and stopping the run, but they haven't got to the quarterback at the rate that I think a lot of people thought that they would. They just don't have the sack numbers. And they've hurried quarterbacks and they've got pressure, but they haven't finished in the backfield, which is it's definitely an area that if that could improve even marginally, Florida's defense would do a much better job at getting off the field, having a chance to, get the football on the ground, get some favorable field position back to the offense. And in some of these games, go back to the loss to, Texas A&M, they couldn't get off the field at the end of the game there. The Aggies had an 8-minute drive where they just kind of sealed the game there after Florida went for it on fourth down with about 13 minutes left to play. And the Aggies just marched down the field, made it a 10-point game. If they could get more stops, make the opposition have third and long at a higher rate, then Florida's defense would be even better than what it has been this season. And they have been good. And so I feels like I'm, nitpicking a little bit when I say, oh, this can improve, because if you're comparing any unit on Florida's team, aside from special teams, defense has been just far better than Florida's offense this season. It hasn't been the issue. And there are some changes related to that in, the move to Ron Roberts from last season with Austin Armstrong departing and going to Houston. Ron Roberts has done a great job with this defense. So it's little things, but if they can improve on it just even a little bit and affect Gunnar Stockton at a higher rate on Saturday, this is a game that could get interesting, and I think a lot of that's going to come down to the talent that is on the offensive line for the opposition. And for Georgia, kind of like what I said with the quarterbacks, I always, would think, oh, Georgia's going to have 4 guys who are going to be all SEC on the offensive line. But it seems like it's been a little bit of a revolving door. I know Monroe Freeling was dealing with a little bit of an injury there. It seems he's back. Just what kind of offensive line, what do you make of the offensive line that Georgia has? And what must they do well against this Florida front that is hungry to have the production that it has kind of evaded them this season?
Well, I'll start with this. Stacy Searles, Georgia's offensive line coach, been in that role for a few years now, second stint at Georgia. He's been much maligned by a lot of fans for the job he's done the last few years. The 24 line, I don't think lived up to expectations. He deserves major kudos because they have been beat up pretty much since week one. The Ole Miss game was the first time they had the same starting 5 that they'd had in a previous game this season, and that would have been going back to week 3 against Tennessee. But perfect timing for the bye week. You got Monroe Freeling. He got hurt against Kentucky, hurt his ankle. Didn't start against Auburn, but he comes in, and he not only comes in, but he plays the majority of the snaps at left tackle. Finally got Ernest Green back. He came back for the Ole Miss game. He had been out since halftime of the Tennessee game. Those guys have, I think with a bye week will only be feeling better getting into this one. And major shout out to 2 true freshmen, Juan Gaston and Dontrell Glover. Those guys have played significant roles. Juan Gaston was the starting right guard to start the year. He got a little banged up. They put Dontrell Glover in there, and he's basically taken over that role with Juan still playing some guard. Really, I think is going to become the backup to Ernest Green at right tackle, and you'll still see some of Juan. They've done a fantastic job in a year where going into this season, there were a few different times I sort of ranked Georgia's position groups as far as the groups I had the most confidence in compared to the group I had the least confidence in, and they were the one I had the least confidence in because of their struggles last year. They had guys that were getting ready to go on to the NFL, and a few of those guys are starting right now. Tate Ratledge with the Lions, Dylan Fairchild with the Bengals, and they could not run block. Their pass protection was sort of hit or miss. The biggest disappointment was their work in the run game, and they've done a great job despite losing those guys. And again, really at this point, it's been Drew Bobo, the center, Mike Bobo's son. He's been the most consistent guy. He's really been the only guy that hasn't battled injury to this point. Micah Morris, who got banged up at one point but went back in and has made every start this year at left guard. And it's been just a rotation. And those guys deserve a lot of credit for fighting through. And again, I think the biggest thing is they've got to find a way to run the football. I think that takes so much pressure off Gunnar Stockton. I think that allows them to play the way they want to play, whether that's running some more play action, whether that's just, again, those second halves, they love just wearing out a defense and just breaking your heart with 4 yard, 5 yard. Oh, we broke a 12 yard. Okay, back to 3 yard. Like just keeping the ball away from you. Time of possession has been really important in some of these games. I think about the Auburn second half. Think about the second half and specifically the fourth quarter against Ole Miss. If those guys can block well up front, if they can protect Gunner, I think that'll be a key. But running the ball, I see as just such an important part when you talk about the equation when it comes to this game. You mentioned special teams, Graham, and I always want to make sure we highlight that because this very well could be a game that comes down to the wire, that comes down to a kick, that comes down to maybe a mistake in the third phase. What is where does Florida's special teams stand at this point? Is it something they can rely on, or has it been an issue to this point in the season?
It's been one of the more impressive special teams units that we've seen in recent years. You lose Jeremy Crawshaw, who was an exceptional punter, gets drafted, goes to the Denver Broncos, and is having a great rookie season. You bring in Tommy Doman from the national champion, maybe with an asterisk there, Michigan Wolverines. And he's been very solid a lot of the time. Now, there have been a few punts where they've gone 35 yards and then given the opponent favorable field position that you didn't see a ton out of that from Crawshaw there. From a long snapper standpoint, Rocco Underwood is the best long snapper in the nation. That's not my opinion. He won the Manley Award last year for the best long snapper in the nation. So got a little stats to back up that claim right there. He's been great for Florida and consistently is one of the first guys down the field, is a great tackler too for a long snapper, which is, I don't think you can say that very often. And then Trey Smack has been exceptionally reliable for Florida, has not missed, knock on wood, extra point attempt in his time at Florida. It was kind of funny. He had a very atypical performance in a game that you could afford to have an atypical performance, which was Florida's season opener against Long Island. He went 2 of 5 on field goal attempts, missed a couple 39-yarders, which, led to some questions. It's not often you can criticize anything when a team wins 55-0, but because he had been so reliable and had such high expectations, people were sitting there and saying, is it a change in mechanics for him? Is it, like I said, Tommy Doman coming in, being the new holder, is maybe they need to, change some things? Is it a mistake? Is it, jitters? What is it here? But ever since then, he's been extremely sound and is a guy who has an impressive leg. It's impressive because he also handles kickoffs for Florida. Doman handled kickoffs at Michigan. So it was a question whether you could, save Smack's leg a little bit by having Doman handle kickoffs, but he's continued handling kickoffs for Florida, which is not an easy feat whatsoever. Guys are feeling, people are going to laugh at this, but kickers get sore too. And when you come out and you kick 4 extra point attempts and 3 field goals and you handle, 8 kickoffs in a contest, you're going to be feeling like you need an ice bath after the game. And so he's improved in that regard, has been extremely solid. From a specialist standpoint, it's one of the strengths of Florida. But the big question, like I mentioned, is in the return game for Florida, because Vernell Brown III was just fantastic as a punt returner. It always felt like a matter of time before he was going to house one. But now he's out for this contest, and you're looking at probably Jaden Baugh in punt return or kickoff return. So you got your primary running back who has some great speed, is hard to bring down, and is going to step into that role. You also have J. Michael Sturdivant, the transfer from UCLA, who has some work in the return game, is faster than people think, was a track guy in high school, ran a 10.3 100-meter dash. You have him back there as well. And then you've got Eugene Wilson, who you can use in punt return and kickoff return. And I wouldn't be surprised if they used more than one guy on punt returns, if they gave 2 people an opportunity in that role, which I'm intrigued to see how that goes, because, one mistake can be devastating in the return game. And you often would choose to play it safe in that regard. So I'm intrigued to see how it is from a return standpoint for Florida, just given that they're missing Vernell Brown. I appreciate, and I'm sure coaches do too, that you talk about special teams. Now it's your turn. What do the Dogs have in this level, in this phase of the game here? How are they from a specialist standpoint? And do they have a dynamic returner who could create, some points on the scoreboard in that facet of the game?
I did want to shout out. You mentioned Rocco Underwood. I thought he was robbed at SEC Media Days. It was Bo Gardner, who all credit due. He's a very good long snapper. That was preseason long snapper. I think the voters, Graham, got a little lazy because they just picked all the Georgia guys. But I just want to shout out Rocco. He was won the award last year. I thought he kind of got robbed there.
I agree. And he has a name you can't forget. I mean, how can you? Rocco Underwood is a strong, strong name. I mean, that is just, you name your kid Rocco Underwood, they better be running a Fortune 500 company or they better be a football standout. And he was the latter.
So with Georgia special teams, I think it's really similar to what you said about Florida. Peyton Woodring's been a really reliable kicker. Had some issues with kickoffs against Ole Miss. Kirby was asked about that on Wednesday. Was he considering using someone else? And Kirby basically said, "Yeah, I'm looking forward to watching Peyton kick." So I was like, "No, we're sticking with Peyton Woodring." But been a really reliable field goal kicker. I think they feel comfortable with him. Anywhere from probably 50 yards, maybe a few yards after that. And he's been very reliable. Again, the kickoffs have been an issue, but he's done a very good job as far as field goal kicking. And I don't believe he's missed an extra point either. So that would be news for either team if they missed a point after on Saturday. Brett Thorson's done a great job coming back from injury. He came back in week 2, and that was honestly earlier than a lot of us expected. Done a great job flipping fields. To me, looks none the worse for wear. Hurt his knee in the SEC title game last year, so great to have him back. Shouted out Bo Gardner. He's done a really good job. I will say this, the Ole Miss game, he had a really low snap on a kick that would make it an 8-point game. The holder, Gunnar Stockton, did a great job of corralling it, getting it down, and setting it up for Peyton Woodring. And I think it's important you mentioned the returners. Zachariah Branch, he's a guy that was a first-team freshman All-American at USC because of his return ability. Think about USC's history. He was the first-team All-American as a true freshman because of his ability. He's had a few nice returns to this point, but nothing game-changing. But he's somebody to keep an eye on. If he gets an opportunity, he's going to take off with it on Saturday. We're going to take a quick break, come back and talk specifically about Saturday, the matchup, what folks are saying, and what we expect to see down in Jacksonville. All right, Graham, what has the conversation been like in Gainesville getting ready for this game? What have Coach Gonzalez, the players, been saying about Georgia and the matchup they're going to be up against down in Jacksonville?
Yeah, they have a ton of respect for Georgia. Like we talked about, the 4-game win streak that Georgia has coming into this game. The fact that just one player on the roster has experienced a win over this team, that both rosters have guys from Florida and Georgia played against one another. Bryce Thornton, Florida's starting safety, played 7-on-7 with Gunnar Stockton and Oscar Delp when he was coming up. And so, guys that know each other, are familiar with one another, have crossed paths at some point, and they have a lot of respect for one another. I know that the hatred between these two fan bases is exclusively that a lot of the time, fan generated, and rightfully so. And especially in this transfer portal era, you never know when you're going to be, lining up next to someone in the future here. We saw that with Trevor Etienne, of course, and fan bases rightfully were mad at him for that decision. And it's a situation though, where on the field, the players have a ton of respect for each other. You're not going to get like a lot of disrespect necessarily. You may have a lot of fiery emotions because these are competitors, but This is a team that respects Georgia. Absolutely. They are aware of how potent they are, even if there are areas that are a little bit not as impressive as normal. This is a talented Georgia team, and that has been the message from Florida. They respect the opponent. With that said, they want to get a victory. They're not throwing in the towel. Billy Gonzalez, Mike Peterson, Brandon Spikes, a lot of, guys who've been around this rivalry for the last 2-3 decades have a ton of, respect for what this rivalry means. And they like this matchup being in Jacksonville. There's certainly some players that would love for it to be a home and home. I haven't been to Athens, haven't seen how beautiful it is. And you guys haven't been to Gainesville and seen how beautiful it is. So I know a lot of people would like for it to be home and home, and we're going to get the Atlanta and Tampa experience the next 2 years. But Jacksonville is a special place, the little border war. It's an exciting matchup, absolutely. And for Florida, everything the conversation has been about respect for Georgia, wanting to get a win and not giving up despite a coaching change. Now, for Georgia, I'm sure that the conversation is a little bit different because as much as they're talking about their respect for Florida, I'm sure they have bigger aspirations than just this game. Has the college football playoff conversation been a consistent one within this program? I mean, you can afford a loss. 2 losses, you're getting right on the edge there. 3 losses, though, difficult to see making the college football playoff in these circumstances. I think Georgia understands, and correct me if I'm wrong, that a win here would absolutely increase their chances of returning to the college football playoff. So is it bigger picture, or are they kind of focused on, the coaching cliche of one game at a time, respect for the opponent, not looking past them?
Oh, that is Kirby Smart's bread and butter. I can't imagine asking him about the playoff, and maybe he feels differently. He's never going to say that publicly. Did want to shout out Mike Peterson, man, Falcons legend. Always loved him when he was in Atlanta. But no, I think that they are really focused on this opponent. And I do think that it helps, Graham, that Kirby knows what it's like as a player to leave Jacksonville with a loss. He knows how it stings. If you remember a few years ago, there was audio leaked of one of his pregame speeches about playing Florida and how much he, hated losing to this team and, wanted them to go out and give it all they had. And, I thought it was really interesting. Jordan Hall, who I think is one of the better interviews on Georgia's team, defensive tackle guy from Jacksonville, he made the point this week that don't get lost in Florida's record. This is a good team. He said that this Florida offensive line he felt like was one of the better ones they faced. And I think there's this understanding, and we talked about this on our podcast earlier this week. Man, the sure way to revive a rivalry, to add some juice to it, is for the other team to break that winning streak. I think there's an understanding that with this Florida team, they're not going to make the playoff. They've already fired their coach. Man, what a rejuvenation it would be for those players to upset one of their biggest rivals and to potentially knock them out of the playoff. We had that conversation too about how deep the playoff race is when you consider just the SEC alone. I think they understand that they have to take it one game at a time, and it certainly helps with Georgia's schedule. We're talking about Florida and Jacksonville, at Mississippi State, who's given a lot of teams trouble, hosting Texas, that's still not out of it. You throw Charlotte in there, that's not going to be anything to write home about. And then Georgia Tech to end the season. I think if you get caught looking ahead at any point, I mean, you could wind up in a really tough situation. So I think they understand the rivalry piece of it helps, but I think they get that there's a lot on the line going forward, and they can't afford to play around with a Florida team that at this point's got nothing to lose. We talked a little bit about the injuries earlier, Graham, but did want to throw it back to you. We've gotten the first availability report of the week. Any other injuries on the Florida front we haven't talked about that folks should just keep an eye out for on Saturday?
Yeah, I think the running back conversation is certainly worthwhile because Florida's going to have to establish the run, and their backup running back, Jacoby Jackson, remains out. He was banged up for a couple weeks and just hasn't been able to go in recent weeks. And then Florida's third string running back, Duke Clark, looked really good when he had an opportunity to be the backup to Jaden Baugh, but he got injured after the Texas A&M during the Texas A&M game, missed the Mississippi State game, and has been trending towards playing on Saturday. But he's listed as questionable on this first availability report. Now we'll see if he gets upgraded to probable or is a game time decision on Saturday. But if not, you're looking at your first and your fourth string running back in Jaden Baugh, obviously at number one, and then Katie Daniels, another sophomore who has been impressive, but found himself passed up on the depth chart by Duke Clark. And then after him, you're looking at, Trayon Webb is also out. He was Florida's number 2 running back last year. He's been injured all year. And then after him, if they experience another injury, you're looking at a freshman in Byron Lewis being your next man up. So that is certainly a situation to monitor. If they can get Duke Clark back for this game, it'll help a good bit. I mentioned Vernell Brown and Aiden Mizell being out for Florida at wide receiver. That's going to impact them. A good news front for injuries for the Gators is Tony Livingston coming back. That's a guy that missed the last game. He's been Florida's backup tight end, which, you use the term backup tight end. I mean, Florida plays a ton of 12 personnel, so you need to have 2 primary tight ends available. And without him, they have been relying on Amir Jackson, a second-year guy who caught his first touchdown a couple weeks ago, but isn't as big of a body as Tony Livingston, so gave up a good bit from a blocking standpoint. So getting Livingston back is big for Florida. And then getting Cormani McLean back, Jordan Castell back in the secondary definitely helps them as well. So probably a little bit more good news than bad news for the Gators on the injury front, and it can be even better for Florida if Duke Clark is available. But the biggest one is absolutely Vernell Brown III being out. Just like we talked about with special teams and being Florida's leading receiver, they're going to be missing him on Saturday, and having someone else step up is going to be key in this game here. I got to throw the same question to you. Are there any notable returners for Georgia on this very minimal availability report? And outside of Colby Young, are there any names that I think that Florida fans could be having to, watch for someone else to step up in someone's place?
So 2 of the guys who are no longer on the availability report, Thomas Blackshear, a receiver, he's a true freshman. We might see him a little, but he's probably not going to play a huge role on Saturday. And then Malachi Tolliver, he's a center. He's a backup, another guy that not going to be a factor. Colby Young, definitely the biggest loss there. Kyron Jones got hurt before the Ole Miss game. He is out. I think Kirby has described him as week to week. That's one of Georgia's starting safeties, so keep an eye on Ja'Cory Thomas. He's going to be the safety starting opposite of KJ Bolden. Be interested to see how he plays. He's a guy that I think at times has looked kind of slow at safety, and I think has given up plays. The only other 2 people that are still out for Georgia, tight end Ethan Barbour, we probably won't see him again this year. Suffered a nasty ankle injury. I think that was against Austin Peay, so he probably won't play. And then Talon Taylor also out, a fast freshman speedster receiver, had a huge drop in the Alabama game. Wound up hurting his collarbone the following week. He's out, but it sounds like he's making good progress. I think maybe 2-3 weeks from now we might see Talon Taylor back. He would be big just because he is an explosive play waiting to happen. All right, Graham, when you look to Saturday, let's say things go well for Florida. What do you think has to be accomplished? What do the Gators need to do to have a chance at pulling off this upset?
I mean, the list is long. They got to get to the quarterback. They got to win the turnover battle, which includes not making the mistakes that we've seen from DJ Lagway. They're going to have to find a way to be explosive in the return game, give Florida favorable field position there in kickoff and punt returns. They're going to have to find a way to execute on third down, which, like I mentioned in that Texas A&M game, eluded Florida and hasn't been great all season long. And they're going to have to establish the run. Jaden Baugh is going to have to lead the way for Florida. He's going to have to be Florida's top offensive weapon. I know that DJ Lagway gets all the acclaim and maybe even some of the notoriety in a sense due to his shortcomings this year. But Jaden Baugh has been steady for Florida. He's, in my opinion, one of the top rushers in the SEC. I think that he's someone that now is going to have an elevated opportunity where he's going to have a chance to have more all-purpose yards, given that he's probably going to serve in the return game as well. He has to be a key player for Florida in this contest if Florida's going to avoid another defeat and drop to 3-5. That absolutely has to be a factor on Saturday here. For Georgia, what do they got to do, in your opinion, to avoid this upset and make it 5 in a row against the Gators?
And the big thing is establishing the run, which I just think is going to be very difficult. And when we talk about how this actually plays out, I think it'll be a little bit like the Auburn game, where it's not to the point of what Georgia has gotten used to this year. I think that's a big thing. Defensively, I think if there are turnover opportunities, you got to take advantage. You've got to put Florida in those third mediums, third and longs that we talked about. And again, I think more than anything, if Florida makes plays early, Georgia's got to shake it off. They've done that to this point in the season. But again, I'm expecting Florida to come out with a plan and some things that put Georgia's guys on the edge and maybe has Georgia playing from behind, which is something they are not. Uh, it's something they've seen quite a bit to this point in the season. I did want to shout out to Jaden Baugh, a Sparta, Georgia native. What's been fun about this series? A lot of guys that are either from Georgia or and play for Florida, or from Florida play for Georgia. Guys that I think fans listening will be like, yeah, I remember that name, and it was a guy that Georgia recruited or that Florida recruited, vice versa. So that makes it just kind of adds something to the rivalry. All right, Graham, when you look to Saturday, how do you think this one plays out? And if you want to give a score prediction, go for it.
Oh man, I'm with you that I think that Florida has an early lead. I think that they're going to come out and look impressive on the opening drive. Can they sustain it offensively, and can they force Gunnar Stockton to make some mistakes that he has not made this season? That's a huge question in this contest. And to be quite frank, coming off of a coaching change, what we've seen from Florida this season, they're going to have to make some plays that they haven't made a ton this year. Get the ball in the air, get an interception, force the ball out on the ground, take advantage of short field position, and make sound decisions in the passing game. And if they can do that, I think that they are going to have chances. And I think it's going to be either a one-score game or tied in the fourth quarter, just like it was last season. But I'm kind of expecting deja vu, where I think that Georgia just has too much talent. They have more to play for. And I think that they get a late score or two and make this look like a little bit more of a lopsided result than it actually was for 3.5 quarters. I went 31-20 Georgia over Florida. 20 seems like a lazy number. So if you're going to call me lazy, that's fine, because that's been the same amount of points that Florida has scored in the last 3 games in this contest. Meanwhile, Georgia has scored 34, 40, 44. They're averaging 39, nearly 40 points per game in these contests. And until I see Florida be more explosive offensively and limit Georgia's offense, it's hard for me to pick a Florida upset. And I think people out there in Bulldog Nation would be saying that I'm talking in orange and blue tinted glasses if I'm coming out and saying, oh, Billy Gonzalez is going to lead this team to a victory. It can happen, but predicting it, you got to see it to believe it, in my opinion. I think that Georgia prevails 31-20. So if you're keeping score at home, I'm not telling you to go out here and put your money where my mouth is, but that would be covering the over of 50.5. And Georgia is currently, a 7.5 point favorite. So I'm predicting Georgia to cover and for the over to hit in that contest. Again, if it doesn't hit, blame Jordan, not me. Jordan, your prediction, how do you see this game shaking out? What does Georgia have to do to avoid getting upset by Florida?
I was going to shout this out. Galen Hall, back in the day, as the interim Florida coach, beat Georgia. So it has happened before. Just pointing that out. I've got Georgia 30-23. I think this is a lot like you laid out, Graham, that I think Florida starts this game fast. I think it's a rejuvenated Florida team trying to take advantage of essentially a second chance with a new head coach. I really do believe the coaching change has put Florida in a better position to try to beat Georgia. The unknown, what they're going to change up, what they want to try to do differently. I think at the end of the day, I think Gunnar Stockton's just going to make too many plays. I think this is going to be a personal game. He grew up a Georgia fan. One of the wildest things I have learned, his grandfather died in Jacksonville after a Georgia-Florida game. I mean, so you just think about that. This guy's a Georgia Bulldog pretty much through and through. I think that he's going to go down to Jacksonville motivated and want to have a good game. Again, I think Florida's run defense is going to give Georgia some issues, but I think they're going to take advantage. of a few DJ Lagway missteps along the way. Again, competitive game. I don't have Georgia covering just narrowly, but I got Georgia 30-23. I think we're in for a fun contest. I think as many of the Georgia games have been this year, and there's probably about 4 minutes left, Graham, and I'm writing two different stories. Just get ready for the thing to end because they like to keep it interesting.
Yeah, they absolutely do. I wonder if that note on Gunner's grandpa, right, you said, is going to be in the game notes. If anyone out there, Georgia SID is listening, put that one in there. I'd love to always have something that's not stat-based in there. So I think it's going to be interesting, though. They got to do Jacksonville proud in the final, at least final for these next 3 years contest before we go Atlanta and Tampa. Give the people a show. It's never been, not to go on a little diatribe here, it's never been more expensive to travel to a game and watch it in the stands and give the people a little bit of a show. I know these two teams are going to compete. What I would love to see, let me say this, is if Florida goes down the field and scores in the opening drive, they should pull a Georgia and the whole team should go into the end zone and celebrate. We've seen Georgia do it, and what happened there? I'm just saying, I would love to see it happen. Give the people a little bit of a show. I know that there would be some people who would say, "Oh, undisciplined. What are you doing here?" I would love to watch. I'd love to watch it. Let me just say that. I'm a little biased, but let me just say that. I would love to see it happen. Do I think it'll happen? No, but I'm begging.
We might hit new traffic numbers on Swamp 24/7 and Dawgs 24/7 if that happens. And pretty much the only time I've ever heard folks call Margaret classless was the time that happened down in Jacksonville. Wanted to read the other scores from our site. Ben Wolk has Georgia 27-17. Livia Sayer has Georgia 34-17. Kip Adams has Georgia 30-17. So it looks like I was the only one over on Dawgs 24/7 to have this a one possession game. Graham, before we get you out of here, I wanted to ask you a couple of things. One, just what it's been like covering this coaching search. I don't know if you want to throw any names out at this point, but a very odd situation with how college football has kind of changed. I mean, we're getting where a coaching change 6-7 weeks in sort of the norm. What's that been like, sort of keeping tabs on that while there's still another half of a season to go?
Yeah, it's been very quiet. I think that there are some obvious candidates. You see Lane Kiffin mentioned. You see, James Franklin, who if I had to bet right now, is going to take over at Virginia Tech. That just seems the way things are trending. And there's some names out there that aren't, I'll be quite honest, the sexy hires that people are looking for. Coordinators do not move the needle for a very hungry, passionate fan base, because then they're going to have to keep being patient. They want to feel good right away after a coaching change, and that just may not happen. Whether it's a Will Stein, you've seen the speculation out there about Glenn Schumann, but you don't hire a search firm if they're going to tell you, "Oh yeah, you're going to hire Lane Kiffin. Yeah, he's the guy to hire." That'd be a waste of money. So I'm expecting this to take a couple different routes. I'm intrigued to see what direction they go. But the biggest thing is that Florida fans are going to have to keep being patient, because some of those names we just mentioned are still coaching for the college football playoff. Lane and obviously Schumann and some guys out there that have been mentioned, they still got things in front of them. It's going to take a little bit more patience, and some things are going to have to play out. Probably the thing that we've heard behind the scenes is that Florida, the thing that they are able to get in front of is the roster management. With the general manager era that we're in right now, and what we mentioned at the beginning of this about the transfer portal not opening, is that you have an increased opportunity with those two things to keep the roster intact and give the incoming coach the best chance of fielding a competitive, experienced team with not having to solely buy players out of the transfer portal in 2026. So that is probably one of the benefits right now. I'm sure that is happening behind the scenes. I've heard it's happening behind the scenes, and we'll continue to report and chase down any leads. But right now, it's pretty quiet, and that's pretty typical for a search firm here. So it's been interesting. A lot of the candidates have been about speculation. If you're going to hire someone right now, is it a Cliff Kingsbury? Is it someone who's not coaching currently right now? I don't have the answers to those questions, because right now they're still, from what I gathered, in the evaluating phase. So people want answer right now. We're in the information age where they want to find out right away. They want us to break it. They want us to give us the scoop. most of what you've seen out there is speculation, people linking potential candidates as this is a name that would make the most sense rather than this is someone that Florida is actively looking at. So it's going to be a little bit quiet on the Western Front for a little while here in Gainesville. And that's going to make each one of these games, I think, a little bit more intriguing, including that Ole Miss South Carolina game this weekend here. Every single SEC game is going to have some intrigue because how the college football playoff shakes out and how the next month of games go could have an impact on Florida's coaching search.
As tough as it is, Graham, just be thankful you're not our buddy Glenn West over on the LSU site covering what looks like is going to be an absolutely wild LSU coaching search. One more thing before we get out of here. Basketball season's less than a week away. Florida getting ready, man, huge opener against Arizona. What are your thoughts on that? And just this Florida team as a whole, defending national champs. I will point out for the Georgia listeners, Georgia did beat Florida toward the end of that season. I think that had a lot to do with the run the Gators went on. But what are your impressions of this team?
Hang the banner, baby. I'm for it. Man, you never want to put back to back as the expectation because that is so rare. That's like it's one of the more rare feats in sports in general, not just in college basketball, but winning back-to-back Super Bowls, anything like that, NBA Finals, you name it. But I think it's even tougher to do in college basketball than the ones I just mentioned because of the parity, because of the transfer portal era, how many teams, 360 plus teams out there in Division I basketball. It's incredibly tough to do. So I've tried to pump the brakes and so discussions, but you look at this roster, they're going to be really, really dang good. They have the best front court in America. It's going to be even better this year because they're going to have Thomas Houck, who I think is going to be one of the top players in the SEC, if not the entire country this season. And I think he's been snubbed a little bit on some of these preseason lists. He's going to be playing at the 3 for Florida, so they're going to be a little bit bigger when you're seeing all these lineups in college basketball of 3 guards, maybe 2 guards and a wing, whatever you want to call it. They're going to have a guy who is going to play it on the wing in the NBA, but he's closer to being, a stretch 4, whatever you want to call it, in college basketball. So they're going to look more interesting in the front court, but this is the best front court that Florida's had. It's even better than the one they had last season because Micah Handlogton only was able to play, for 2 months, and he was not in the best shape that he could be in. Now he's gone through a full off season. For the first time, they have both Ruben Chinyelu and Micah Handlogton at the 5. Alex Condon has gotten better around the basket. He's a great passer. He's improved his shot making. He's gotten more confident. What we've seen out of him for the last month has been really impressive. And then Thomas Houck has just got better as a ball handler, facilitator, more confident as well. And they're going to kind of see this leadership shift go from the backcourt contingent of Walter Clayton, Elijah Martin, Will Richard to it being those guys in the front court who have to lead the way. And then you look at the backcourt that they assembled in Xavier Lee and Boogie Flan, 2 guys that by 247 Sports are rated top 35 transfers. Boogie Flan was a top 10 transfer. It's probably going to be one of the more impressive sophomores in college basketball this season. He is going to be, better on defense than I think a lot of people think. He's a better shot maker than a lot of people think. He can stretch, you out and finish at the rim. He can score from all 3 levels. Xavier Lee is extremely crafty. I think if there's a question right now, it's maybe the depth of Florida's backcourt. They'd want to see a little bit more out of Isaiah Brown, out of Urban Klabsar. They could get better in that front if A.J. Brown is able to play a consistent role for Florida this year, which isn't a given because he's coming off shoulder surgery and still is working his way back into being, fully healthy. And, it's not totally out of the question that he takes a medical red shirt. And then you're going to be probably relying on some freshmen. They have 2 really, really good freshmen in CJ Ingram, who's more of a defensive-minded, high-energy guy, can play on the wing. This is someone who is going to just create havoc in passing lanes. He's going to affect shots. He's going to get out in transition. He's going to finish at the rim. Not a great shot maker. Alex Lloyd has an absolute bag. Played for Night Riders Elite, which won 3 consecutive Peach Jam tournaments. He played with Caden and Cam Boozer. He played with Allen, who's now at Miami. I mean, he's played with some top players. and just he's been a standout for Florida. He's added 15 pounds to his frame. He's going to play as a freshman, which in this day and age is never a given, especially for the defending national champions, that a freshman can come in and carve out a role. But I think you're going to see that from Florida this season. This is going to be a really, really good team, but they're not going to do, in my opinion, what they did last year. They're not going to go undefeated in non-conference play. Last year, they rallied against North Carolina. They had some impressive wins, beat Florida State when held off a late Florida State rally. This year, you mentioned they got to take on Arizona and Las Vegas. Arizona has a really good, trio of freshmen that are going to be really good this season. Then they have to take on Miami on November 16th in Jacksonville, then Florida State, and then TCU. And then they play the best, most interesting week of college basketball in this season, in my opinion. They take on Duke at Cameron Indoor on December 2nd in the ACC SEC Challenge, and then head to Madison Square Garden to take on UConn on December 9th. That is going to be a fascinating week. And then in the middle of that, you got this little thing called early signing day. So that is going to be a great week of no sleep and some fantastic games. And I'm really looking forward to it. It's a couple days away. The season tips off Monday in Las Vegas for the defending national champion Florida Gators. And then to bring us full circle, they'll show everyone the banner that they hung on November 6th when they have the home opener against UNF.
Florida and Arizona in Las Vegas Monday night. Georgia starts its season Tuesday night by hosting Bellarmine. And Graham, I hope you're able to make some of those trips. Those are some fun non-conference games over the stretch of November and December. Well, Graham, I really appreciate the time. I do want to give you the opportunity. Shout out to what you guys got going on at Swamp 24/7. If there's folks listening to this who want to check out more about the Gators, what should they be keeping an eye on?
Yeah, coaching search profiles, updated hot boards, you name it. Great recruiting content. Florida's recruiting class has kind of been pretty quiet in this coaching change, which is impressive. They've all stayed committed, probably in wait and see mode, just like everyone else out there and is in the Florida fan base. But we've been keeping tabs on them. Tyler Harden does a great job. My coworker Zach Goodall has done a really good job with the coaching search stuff. I'll be doing full basketball coverage starting next week, so I'll be trying to find a little time to sleep, maybe during the day. Who knows what time? I'm a big nap guy, so we'll find out. And yeah, we have a ton of stuff over. Whatever you do, make sure you sign up to Swamp 247 or 247 Sports in general, because then you can come bother me and Jordan on each one of our respective boards. And it's always a great time to talk to you, man. I'm looking forward to getting up there Saturday and seeing you and chatting and seeing how this game unfolds in Jacksonville.
Yeah, I think we're in for a good one. I'll shout out to Dawgs 24/7, myself, Kip Adams, Benjamin Wolk, Olivia Sayer. They all do a great job. Fun time of year, as Graham mentioned, basketball season about to get started. Fun time to be covering football and basketball and following along. And we hope if you're listening to this, whether it's for the Florida side with Swamp 24/7 or the Georgia side, Dawgs 24/7, you'll follow our stuff. And I'll shout out too if you're listening on Thursday, 60% off for your first for an annual subscription, or just pay $1 for your first month at Dawgs 24/7. That sale ends midnight on Thursday, so take advantage. So we'll end the episode right there. Thanks everyone who watched this live, everyone who's watching or listening to it after the fact. Thanks so much to Graham for taking the time, and we'll end it right there. For Graham Hall, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.